Hi everyone, this is Angie and Ben, and welcome to our homestead. We started our process by cutting 1 5/8 inch fence posts in half to roughly 4-foot lengths. I used the reciprocating saw with a sheet metal blade to accomplish that task. We had to drill a series of holes through these ground posts. The first set is measured 23 inches from one end. You want to make sure the hole goes straight through. I used a step-up bit, which cannot go all the way through, so I had to drill a hole on each side. The trick I used to make sure both holes matched and were parallel straight through was to identify the outermost parts of the pipe with a caliper. A better way to do this would have been some sort of vise and a drill press. I don't have either of those, so I made do with this pallet. The hole drilled 2 inches from the top defines where you'll tighten the bolt that connects the ground post to the upper hoop. I bolted the jig to this 2x6, but I didn't have any screws or bolts heavy duty enough to resist all the leverage that we're putting on it. So I wedged a pallet in there to prevent the screws from getting sheared off.
So the first post is the easiest to drive into the ground. You just pick a spot and hammer it in, and then you'll use that post as a reference to do the other 3 posts using some trigonometry and just basic math. We had to measure the length and width of our greenhouse to position the other 3 corners. We bought a tool from Bootstrap Farmer that inserts into the top of the ground post, and this prevents the pipe from deforming when we hit it with a hammer. So our string line was tensioned across the corner posts, which made it easier to keep a straight line. So we spaced our interior posts around 4 feet apart from each other. Our line was so straight that we could look through the holes and see all the way from end to end.
We did a test fit of the first hoop and we discovered that it holds a lot of tension. Every hoop is going to be a slightly different bend because we bent it by hand. They are bendy enough and flexible enough to force it into the ground posts, but the ground posts are very sturdy. They were driven 2 feet into the ground.
This bolt holds the hoops at the same height by preventing them from sliding down into the ground posts. It also prevents them from being lifted out of the ground by wind.
The baseboards define the interior space. They act as a perimeter, sort of like a raised bed. We ended up filling ours with mulch, and this prevented the mulch from spilling out of the greenhouse.
We use the holes in the pipes as a guide to drill through the wood of the baseboards.
Our headboards are pretty high to maximize crosswind ventilation during the hot summers of North Carolina. The top of the greenhouse, the plastic, it'll be secured to those boards. And we installed the headboards the same way that we installed the baseboards. We used clamps just because it's a handy way to make it a one-person task. Bootstrap Farmer doesn't have any instructions on framing the end walls. We had to get creative while imagining what we wanted to do with them. So we sort of used the wheelbarrow as the limiting factor. We wanted a door big enough to fit our wheelbarrow through, just to move materials back and forth. I basically just stood two 2x4s vertically. I used a level to make sure they were vertical. Got up on the ladder, and I got a marker and I traced the top and the bottom of each of the hoops. It's important to just trace out what you need to cut because these measurements are not going to be exact. Like we said before, there's a variation because of manually bent holes. The upper of the two lines that I traced earlier is what defines where the board needs to be cut off. You don't want there to be any excess slack in this 2x4 or else it'll puncture the plastic. The bottom of the two lines is where a notch will need to be cut just to give enough clearance for the upper hoop to allow the 2x4 to stand freely. Basically, the upper hoop will be in the way, so you'd need to cut just enough out for it to sit flush. In our case, our top pipes are 1 3/8 inch, so I just measured that as the depth and cut out a notch. Our ridge pole stuck out too far, so I just cut that off with the same sheet metal blade I've been using on my reciprocating saw. Again, this is just to prevent any punctures in the plastic.
Here I pre-drilled the wiggle wire channels to make it easier to attach to the wood and metal hoops. We also used that same sheet metal blade to cut those to length as needed.
Basically, everywhere that the plastic needs to terminate has to have wiggle wire and a wiggle wire channel. Any door opening or any termination point has to be framed out with wiggle wire channels. We can bend the wiggle wire channels by hand, but we use clamps for an easier install. Only the hoops located on the end walls need wiggle wire. Our kit did come with self-tapping screws for the metal-on-metal connections. We can bend the wiggle wire channels by hand, but we use clamps for an easier install. Only the hoops located on the end walls need wiggle wire. Our kit did come with the self-tapping screws for the metal-on-metal connections. The plastic we got in our kit is really heavy duty, but that made it really hard to move around. It's very heavy. When we were pulling it over the top of the hoops, extra people would have been helpful, One thing I read online is that you could use a rounded broom handle or some other sort of stick that's not going to puncture the plastic to help push it up in the middle and get that extra weight over the top ridge pole down the other side.
We actually got lucky, and there was a wind gust that came in and helped us pull it over just right when we were starting to struggle with it.
There's some sort of logo printed on the plastic that determines which side should face up and which side should face down. What I didn't realize till after we installed it is that this printing is actually done right in the center of the sheet. We should have aligned that with the ridge pole, but we didn't. So our plastic is a bit off-center.
So opposite end wall from where we have our door, we did install a vent close to the top of the structure to allow hot air to escape.
And similar to the end wall with the door, we basically just defined the spacing of the 2x4s on whatever we needed to fit in there. Instead of a wheelbarrow this time, it was the vent that we just bought at the local hardware store. We knew how wide it was, so we framed it out based on that. But really, there's no other math involved on the south end wall.
Our kit came with one piece of plastic big enough to cover the whole thing, and there weren't really clear instructions about how to cut the plastic, so we just kind of made it up as we went along as far as covering the whole structure and then cutting it to accommodate the end walls.
So working from the center out on every wall, we started with one end wall, tensioned it, moved on to the other end wall, and then we started with one side and then moved on to the next side. Each time pulling the plastic pretty tight to make sure there were no wrinkles, but we did observe that if you pull it too tight, the wiggle wire can deform or even puncture the plastic when you're wiggling the wire into the channel. But that's your chance to pull the wiggle wire back out one or two bends, loosen the plastic a bit, and then put it back into place. We don't have any video about putting plastic over the end walls because it was pretty confusing. We had to do some research to see how other people did it, but Bootstrap Farmer, again, didn't really explain well how it should be done. We guess everyone's end walls could be different. People have different tools that they want to get in and out. People have different doors. Some people want a door on both sides.
So basically you have to design your end wall to accommodate your needs. Ours is pretty short. We only have a 20-foot length. I think that if we were going to be making it 40 or 50-foot length, then we might want two doors, to be able to access it from both sides. But for now, I'm pretty happy with the design. So here's the end product of our door. Got just a little piece of lumber here that we use as a latch to close it, and then hands-free to open it back up again. And then this is our side walls. We use this rope to hold it in place, and we can lower it or raise it. We got these hooks that fit into the wiggle wire channels, and that keeps the rope in place so that the sidewalls don't blow around in the wind.